Hey everyone, I hope that everyone's days are going well. Today I'm going to be talking about violence against women, starting from talking about violence against female Olympic runners in Kenya, and then kind of broadening that to global femicide. So, before I start talking about everything, I wanted to discuss why I chose this topic. So, after watching the Olympics this year, I ran across a startling headline reading Olympic runner dead after being burned alive. Immediately, I read the article and figured out that this horrific event is not uncommon for female African Olympic athletes or female athletes at all. Okay. Before I kind of get into the key terms and concepts, I wanted to draw your attention to the map in the top right corner. This map is a project taken on by a journalist um, who undertook research and photos to basically memorialize victims of femicide from Australia. So I think this is a really heartfelt and an informative way to think about femicide. It's not just one country's problem. Obviously, this is just Australia's case, but every country has issues with femicide. Um, So yeah, it's just a way to get you thinking about that. So femicide. Um, Merriam-Webster defines femicide as the gender-based murder of a woman or girl by a man. Um, so basically, we're going to be talking about how femicide relates to our understanding of human rights. Next, we have honor killing, which is the traditional practice in some countries of killing a family member who is believed to have brought shame on the family. There are thousands of cases of women being killed by their family members because of this. Intersectionality is a big part of understanding femicide. Intersectionality in this context means women of color who live in certain areas under certain conditions are generally more vulnerable than a white woman living in the suburbs who has a comfortable salary. But as we will see throughout the rest of the presentation, no woman is exempt from this, unfortunately. It's just that different women have different relationships with violence. So lastly, we have state responsibility slash impunity, and they kind of go hand in hand. We have talked a lot about state responsibility in class, and due to the high rates of femicide, for example, there are many activists who are pushing for the state to include and recognize femicide as an issue. And because of the government's lack of agency, there's a lot of impunity in many cases of femicide, and which basically means that a murderer is exempt from punishment or harm, um, which is really terrible. So these are four runners from Kenya who are victims of femicide. So firstly, on the top left, we have Rebecca Cheptegei. Thursday, September 5th, 2024, 33-year-old Olympic runner Rebecca Cheptegei died a horrific death after being doused with petrol and set on fire by her boyfriend. She suffered 80% burns on her body, and Cheptegei competed in the women's marathon in the Paris Olympics less than a month before she passed. Although from Uganda, she lived in Western Kenya and trained in their high altitude region that draws some of the best distance runners from across the world. In 2021, Agnes Tirop was brutally murdered by her husband in her own home and had just competed in the Tokyo Games that same year. 6 months after she was murdered, another runner was killed. Kenyan-born Damaris Muthi, who competed for Bahrain, was found dead after being strangled. A male Ethiopian runner with whom she was in a relationship was charged with her murder. There's still a manhunt underway to find him, which is really scary. Edith Mutoni was a 27-year-old national star runner who was found with fatal stab wounds in her neck at her home in Kianji's village. Her husband was arrested and charged with her murder, but he might be on bail. Nobody is exactly sure where he is either. So it's really sad. So obviously, I was wondering, and I hope that you're wondering too, why is this happening and what can we do to change it? But I realized as violence against women in Central Africa persists, Kenyan women athletes in particular fear that they will be next. For years, women in that area have suffered physical and sexual abuse, including gruesome murders from partners, spouses, and other family members in Kenya, as we've seen. No woman is an exception, not even elite athletes. Their global success has made them a target among men still governed by more patriarchal gender norms. Female athletes face high levels of emotional and physical violence from males who are jealous of their success or looking to control their earnings. Statistics show that 1 in 3 women in Kenya report at least one case of abuse by the age of 28. And in January of this year, there were at least 32 women murdered by male perpetrators, which averages to around one woman per day. Women's rights groups, like I was talking about earlier, are thankfully pushing for femicide to be included in more political discussions. Yet fewer than a handful of all femicide cases end with the perpetrator being jailed. And there's a common consensus among African women that many of their governments treat crimes against women, including murder, sexual harassment, and assault, um, not with the urgency that they deserve. So, this trend in Kenya highlights a global trend of femicide. Violence against women and girls remains one of the least prosecuted and punished crimes in the world. The UN states that it is still so deeply embedded in cultures around the world that it is almost invisible and is a construct of power and a means of maintaining the status quo. So it's almost desensitized everyone due to its prevalence. In the UK, for example, men are killing one woman every 3 days, and over half of the women killed in 2020 were killed by their former partner. Thankfully, there is plenty that can still be done to combat femicide and even prevent it. The Center for Women's Global Leadership at Rutgers released a 2022 16 Days of Activism guide highlighting all the actions that individuals, communities, employers, the media, and the governments can take to help prevent and end femicide. They highlighted several things about femicide, stating that the true scale is likely much higher than reported. For roughly 4 in 10 intentional murders of women and girls, there's not enough information to identify them as gender-related killings because of national variation in criminal justice reporting and investigation practices. Although it may seem like all these cases are caused by an intimate partner or family member, are counted as femicides, gender-related killings take place in many contexts beyond the private sphere. They can be related to rape or sexual violence by someone completely unknown to the victim, harmful practices such as female genital mutilation, or like I was talking about earlier, the so-called honor killings, as a result of hate crimes linked to sexual orientation or gender identity, etc., and the list goes on. The fact that we don't know a lot about the true number of femicides is a big part of what makes this issue so hard to combat. Around the world, women and girls face differing risks, like I was talking about earlier with the intersectionality. For example, Indigenous women in Canada and Australia are at a different type of risk than women in Kenya or Japan. And I was reading that Japan is a country with one of the highest rates of female homicide victims in the world. So I know that it really does seem like a lot. It's an overwhelming, yet underreported number of incidents. But I hope that everyone who watches takes a second look at how, especially men, but also women, treat women. This is something that can happen to your mothers, your grandmother, your sister, and in the future, maybe even your daughter. This is an issue that is unforgiving. Femicide is unforgiving, which is why we must take personal individual steps to help combat it. Anyways, thank you all for watching. If you have any comments or questions, please ask away in the comment section below. And I hope that you all have a good night.